January 1943. Coventry, England. The night the impossible landed in Britain. The blackout lamps cast a weak amber glow across the snow-dusted cobblestones outside the Coventry Steel Alloys Works, a factory that had been at war long before the Luftwaffe ever dropped its first bombs. The air smelled of coal smoke and freezing fog, and from within the great corrugated iron sheds came the low, constant thunder of drop hammers beating metal into obedience. It was a sound the men inside had long since ceased to hear as noise. It was simply the heartbeat of their world. At the gate, a Bedford lorry idled with its engines steaming in the cold. Two armed Home Guard volunteers stood flanking the driver, their rifles slung casually, but their expressions serious. They weren't guarding the driver. They were guarding the cargo. Inside the back of the truck, under army tarpaulins and layers of straw, were two massive and oddly shaped steel ingots, prototype forgings produced in an American plant in Indiana. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Each was rough, unfinished, and pitted from the weeks-long transatlantic voyage, but unmistakable in its form. Even in their crude state, they radiated purpose. These were crankcase forgings, colossal circular 18-segment blanks designed to form the core of what America called a Wright R-33 duplex cyclone. A monster of an engine. 18 cylinders, twin rows, a displacement of 3,350 cubic inches, the beating heart of the B-29’s superfortress, a machine Britain had never seen, and an engine British metallurgists had declared impossible to forge at scale. The driver cleared his throat. "Right then," he murmured, looking up at the looming factory. Time to deliver the future. Inside Bay 4, the temperature hovered somewhere between meat locker and frozen battlefield. The oil-smudged windows had long ago surrendered any transparency, and frost clung to the steel pillars like hoarfrost on winter trees. Men in heavy wool coats and soot-stained scarves worked beside glowing furnaces, whose radiant heat never seemed to reach beyond a few yards. At the center of the bay stood Chief Metallurgist Arthur Knowlton, a tall, weathered man with iron-gray hair and the calm eyes of someone who had lived inside steelworks since boyhood. His father had worked the furnaces here before him. His grandfather, before that. In the Knowlton family, the roar of the forge was practically hereditary. Knowlton stood beside his deputy, Dr. Evelyn Hart, a physicist-turned-materials expert who had joined the Ministry of Aircraft Production in 1941 after refusing to be evacuated from London. She wore heavy gloves and a greasy leather coat that was 2 sizes too large. Her breath misted in the cold air as she flipped through a sheaf of American blueprints. "These dimensions can't be right," she said for the 3rd time, tapping the diagram of the R-3350's main crankcase. 24 inches across at the central bearing, 39 at the outer rim. And the wall thickness varies by millimeters in places. "Millimeters, Arthur." Knowlton grunted. "Americans don't use millimeters. They use fractions of an inch that drive sane people mad." "That's not the problem," she said. "The problem is no British foundry has ever forged anything this large with tolerances this tight. This isn't a crankcase. It's a cathedral dome, made of steel." Knowlton's lips curled into a reluctant smile. "Perhaps that's why the Americans insisted we attempt it." "Perhaps," Evelyn said, "because their own factories are drowning in B-29 deadlines." Knowlton nodded. He understood more than he let on. News had already filtered across the Atlantic. Fires, warped housings, overheating cylinders. The R-3350 was a masterpiece. Yes, but also a curse. A puzzle wrapped in steel and flame. America needed help, and Britain, with its centuries-long experience in specialty alloys, had quietly agreed to try forging several critical components. But forging meant heat, pressure, precision that defied wartime chaos, precision that defied physics at this scale. Evelyn looked at the blueprint again, her brow furrowed. "This thing is supposed to survive at internal temperatures over 300 degrees Celsius, oil pressure fluctuations, shock loads from takeoff, vibration from 18 pistons hammering at thousands of explosions per minute. Knowlton finished for her, and all while delivering 2,200 horsepower at cruising altitude. "You read the reports," she said softly. "Some American officers think the B-29 might end the war." Knowlton exhaled a long, slow breath that fogged the blueprint between them. "If we can forge its heart." The bay doors groaned open behind them. Cold wind swept inside as the Bedford lorry reversed toward the inspection pit. Its tires crunched over ice. A sergeant jumped out and signaled the men. 2 crane operators jogged forward, their boots echoing on the concrete. Moments later, the crane's chain hooks descended with metallic clinks. Knowlton stepped forward. "Careful with the lifting balance, he barked. The crane rose, and the tarpaulins snapped free. Gasps echoed around the bay. The forgings were enormous. Raw steel wheels a meter thick, 1.5 meters wide, each weighing more than 700 kilograms. Their surfaces bore scars from rough milling, and salt streaks from Atlantic spray glistened like frost. Evelyn stepped closer, her gloved hand hovering just above the cold steel. "These are extraordinary," she whispered. Knowlton's eyes narrowed. Extraordinary or impossible? She didn't answer. The ingots were lowered onto a reinforced inspection table. The clang reverberated through the bay. The workers gathered, forming a half-circle around them. One of the younger smiths, a broad-shouldered lad from Birmingham named Callum Briggs, whistled. "Bloody hell! Looks like something you'd wheel into place for summoning a demon." "Or a super fortress," Evelyn corrected. Callum blinked. "A what?" "You'll hear the name soon enough," she said. Knowlton stepped forward, his boots ringing on steel. He placed a caliper onto the forging's surface. He rotated it, adjusted, measured. His expression grew darker with each reading. Dr. Hart watched him, reading the tension in his shoulders. "Arthur." He didn't reply. "Arthur." He finally stood straight. "Evelyn, this forging, this blank. The Americans have produced it with tolerances we can barely achieve, milling gun sights. But the final machining will be theirs," she said. "We only need to forge the rough form." Knowlton gave her a look that froze her mid-sentence. "The Americans want us to match this quality, duplicate it, improve it if possible." A silence spread slowly across Bay 4. As someone muttered, "Impossible." Someone else whispered, "We can't do what they do. Not with these furnaces." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Arthur, the Americans used open-die forging presses, far larger than ours. They heat-treated these pieces in furnaces with better temperature control than anything we have left after the Blitz." "I know. And their chromium alloy mixture. Good God, it's practically surgical in composition. We don't even have enough chromium left in the country to—" "I know, Evelyn." She stared at him. "Then what do we do?" Knowlton ran a hand along the forging's rim. The steel was frigid, but he felt the beating heart behind it. The American ambition, the industrial fury, the dream of a bomber that could cross an ocean and return on 1 tank of fuel. Something Britain had never asked for. Something Britain could never build alone. "We try anyway," he said. "Because if the Americans believe this engine can end the war faster, then we forge the damn thing, even if it kills us." The initial inspection lasted until nearly midnight. By then, the fog outside had thickened into a wet, smothering blanket. The night shift furnaces glowed like volcanic craters, and sparks fluttered upward like fireflies, trying desperately to keep warm. Evelyn scribbled notes, while Knowlton dictated measurements. Around them, workers rolled out chalkboards, weighed samples, and prepared the crucibles. The first obstacle appeared almost immediately. "The alloy's grain structure," Evelyn said, peering through a handheld microscope. "Look at this pattern. It's directional." Knowlton leaned in. "They forged these under continuous pressure, not stepped. Their presses can maintain force across the entire radius without interruption. We can't. No, even Sheffield can't." Knowlton sighed. We'll have to modify the forging sequence. Evelyn glanced at the chalkboard where she'd written out the R3350's key dimensions. The Americans start with a massive ingot, heat it to 1050 degrees, then they hammer it into a preform, then they press it into a radial mandrel. Impossible with our equipment. So we improvise. Knowlton smiled bitterly. We're British. Improvisation is our second national sport. What's the first? Queuing. Despite the cold. Evelyn laughed, and the sound of it warmed him more than the furnaces. At 010 Cook, the station whistle blew for the change of shift, but no one moved to leave. Even the men whose 12-hour shifts were technically over remained where they were, huddled in circles, smoking cigarettes near the drafty doors. Word had spread across the works like wildfire. The Americans had brought something new, something enormous, something that might change the course of the war. By 200, the drafting office was lit again. Engineers poured through American documents stamped "restricted." Evelyn translated the American measurements into British technical language, while Knowlton drew forging sequences, by hand, 10, 20, 30 diagrams, each one discarded with a frustrated groan. "It won't hold the grain alignment," Evelyn said, shaking her head at the 10th sequence. "Then we force it to." "How?" "By reheating between each radial strike." "That will take hours, Arthur." "Then we work for hours. And the steel will decarburize if we do that." Knowlton slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the ink bottle. "Then we invent a way to stop it." Silence. Then slowly Evelyn nodded. "Salt baths," she whispered. "Brine, quenching between heats. We can prevent surface oxidation. We can keep the carbon content stable." Knowlton leaned forward. "Show me." She sketched rapidly. A furnace, a crucible, a chemical bath, a sequence of heating and cooling cycles alternating with controlled deformation. Knowlton's eyes widened. "That might actually work." "It's dangerous," she warned. "The thermal shock alone could shatter the forging." "Then we pray it doesn't." At 0330, the first test began. The furnace doors opened, washing the bay in blinding orange. The forging slid into the flames on a heavy steel tray. Men in leather aprons and face shields adjusted dials and stoked the fire until the steel surface glowed cherry red. The heat was overwhelming. Even standing 10 feet away, Evelyn felt her face burn. "Temperature?" Knowlton barked. 900 degrees and climbing," shouted an operator. "Give it time." The forging would need nearly an hour to reach uniform temperature. A full hour in which the steel would change its crystalline structure, its grain alignment, its internal stresses. An hour in which the difference between success and catastrophic failure could be as small as 20 degrees. Evelyn checked her watch. 14 minutes in. Knowlton watched the steel through narrowed eyes. "Watch for uneven glow." "I am." "Watch for spalling." "I am." "And watch the damn thermometer." She rolled her eyes. "I am, Arthur." He almost smiled. At 52 minutes, the readings stabilized. "Ready?" Evelyn said. Knowlton signaled to the hammer crew. The men moved into position like soldiers, preparing artillery. The furnace doors opened. Steam and heat poured out in a wave so intense the nearest men shielded their faces. The forging, now a bright, nearly white disk of radiant steel, was hauled out by chain lifters and placed onto the anvil. Knowlton raised his arm. The 5-ton drop hammer climbed, paused, fell, boom. The entire bay shook. Sparks erupted in a fountain that sprayed across the forge floor like molten rain. Men stepped back instinctively. The smell of burning oil filled the air. "Again!" Knowlton shouted. The hammer rose, fell, boom. The forging shifted shape, expanding outward by millimeters. Each strike forced the grain into new alignment, like kneading dough the size of a wagon wheel. "Temperature dropping!" Evelyn yelled. "Back to the furnace!" The forging was hauled away, leaving glowing footprints of molten scale on the concrete. Knowlton exhaled. "How long to reheat?" 40 minutes. "We go again." She blinked in disbelief. "Arthur, it's nearly dawn." "Then we race the sun." By sunrise, they had completed 5 cycles, 5 hours of heat, hammer, each more grueling than the last. Even the most seasoned smiths were coated in sweat and soot. The forging, still unfinished, now had the beginnings of its final structure, radial arms extending outward like the ribs of a steel sun. Callum Briggs rubbed his aching shoulders. "Feels like we're beating the heart of a dragon." "No," Knowlton said hoarsely. "The heart of a fortress." Evelyn wiped soot from her face, exhausted but exhilarated. "Arthur, look at it. Look at the grain structure." She handed him the microscope. He leaned over, peered in. His breath caught. It was working. Slowly, painfully, but working. The impossible forging was beginning to take shape. And somewhere over the Atlantic, in factories from Kansas to California, America waited for Britain to do what even their own engineers said could not be done: forge the heart of the mightiest engine ever built, the engine of the B-29, the engine that would change the war. Dawn filtered weakly through the jungle canopy like thin yellow metal poured through a sieve. Sergeant Masaru Ishii crouched beneath a screen of pandanus leaves, his breath fogging faintly in the morning chill. Hours earlier, he and his two reconnaissance men, Corporal Tanaka and Private First Class Riku Mori, had slipped from their forward observation pit and pushed deeper into the overgrown ravines that curved toward the southern ridgeline. The night's rain, still, clung to the leaves and their uniforms, soaking them to the bone, their boots squelched in mud that sucked at every step. But the terrain wasn't what made Ishii's nerves flutter like moth wings. It was the silence. Bougainville was never silent. Cicadas, frogs, birds, they formed a continuous orchestra that rose and crashed in waves across the island. Rarely did they all stop at once, and rarely did they stay silent for this long. Corporal Tanaka noticed it too. He paused, adjusting the Type 97 binoculars hanging from his neck. "Sergeant," he whispered, "the jungle feels wrong." Mori snorted softly. "Everything feels wrong here." "No," Tanaka insisted, lowering his voice even more. "It's like the island is holding its breath." Ishii scanned the ravine floor. Dead leaves, ferns as tall as a man, trees thick with vines like coiled snakes. Nothing moved. Even the wind seemed to cower behind the hills, unwilling to disturb whatever hung heavily in the air. The Americans were out there. They were moving. But the jungle refused to betray them. By mid-morning, the Japanese scouts had worked their way to the top of a narrow ridge overlooking the Mission Trail, an old missionary track that had been widened during peacetime, but left mostly unused until the war swallowed the island whole. The track snaked from the coastal foothills into the deeper highlands where the U.S. Marines were rumored to be amassing for something significant. Rumors, nothing more. But Tokyo's high command issued an order in December. Bougainville must not fall any further. Any intelligence, no matter how insignificant, must be reported immediately. Even the number of tents in an enemy bivouac was considered relevant. Tanaka crawled to the edge of a rocky shelf, raised his binoculars, and peered through a gap in the foliage. "Movement?" Ishii stiffened. "How many?" Hard to say." "Estimate." Tanaka swallowed. "At least 100 vehicles." Mori whistled under his breath. "100? Out here?" "No," Tanaka whispered tensely. "They're not here. They're moving along the big clearing near the foothills. Somewhere around—" He paused, then sucked in a sharp breath. Ishii grabbed his own binoculars. Below them, maybe 2 kilometers away, a trail cut through the jungle like a wound. It shouldn't have been that wide. The Americans must have carved it using bulldozers. And on that trail, a trickle of olive-drab silhouettes crawled forward like armored beetles. Trucks, jeeps, half-tracks, bulldozers, a few tanks, but not 100, far less. 30, 40 vehicles, Ishii murmured, calculating. The earlier estimate of 100 was too high. Still, even 40 vehicles was enough to support a major offensive. He scribbled notes in his book, drew a quick contour map, and marked the American movement with arrows and approximate timings. Tanaka sighed with relief. 40 is manageable. If this is all they have, we can. But he stopped again, and not because the convoy had grown. The jungle trembled. just slightly, like the first shiver before a landslide. Ishii felt it in the soil beneath his elbows. A low, rhythmic vibration rolled through the ridge, resonating in the stones and bones of the earth. The trees nearest the old missionary trail shook gently, leaves shivering. Mori frowned. "Earthquake?" "No," Ishii whispered. "Engines." And then the sound came, faint, distant but unmistakable. A hum. Then a rumble. Then a rolling thunder like a world-sized drumbeat. Vehicles. A lot of them. Tanaka lifted the binoculars again. His hands trembled. "Oh. Oh no. Sergeant." "What do you see?" "More." "More how many?" "No. You don't understand." Tanaka's voice rose, trembling with disbelief. "It's another column. A bigger one. Much bigger." Ishii snatched the binoculars. The scene unfolding below felt unreal. From the southern tree line, one that had been silent, empty, utterly still only minutes ago, vehicles began pouring out in a line that stretched so far back the end was swallowed by foliage and distance. It was like watching the jungle give birth to steel. Trucks, amphibious tractors, tank transporters, armored bulldozers, jeeps gliding through mud, long six-wheelers ferrying men, crates, barrels, rafts. The earth shook beneath them. 200? Mori asked weakly. "More," Ishii said. 500. The column did not stop, nor slow, nor thin. It only grew. Tanaka whispered, "Sergeant, that is not 500. "No." "How many then?" Ishii lowered the binoculars slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile logic of the world. "I count no less than 7,000. Mori laughed hysterically. "7? That's impossible. This island can't hold 7,000 vehicles." "It can," Ishii murmured, cold realization blooming across his face. "If the Americans built roads we didn't know existed." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. They watched the procession for nearly an hour. It did not stop. Every type of machine the Americans used in the Pacific, those Ishii recognized, and many he had never seen, rolled steadily northward. Massive graders flattened the mud, trucks hauling planks for bridging sped along, tanks rumbled in pairs, even artillery pieces were towed past in the long convoys. Tanaka muttered, "How did they hide all of this? Where did they get the manpower? Where did they get the fuel?" Mori added. Ishii understood then that none of them had grasped the true scale of American logistics. Not yet. Not until this moment. Tokyo believed the US was moving carefully, methodically, rebuilding from earlier losses. But here, right here in Bougainville, they were witnessing something else entirely. Industry made manifest, steel given legs, a war machine fed by factories an ocean away. "Sergeant," Tanaka whispered, "we need to report immediately." "Yes, but not from here. Too exposed." As they retreated from the ridge, Ishii glanced back one last time. A fresh cloud of dust and diesel exhaust rose into the jungle canopy, dimming the morning sun. The convoy still stretched beyond the horizon. The enormity of it pressed into his mind like a weight. 7,000 vehicles. This wasn't preparation for a small offensive. This was the prelude to a campaign, one meant to bury the Japanese presence on Bougainville forever. They descended the ridge at double pace, weaving between vines, ducking beneath fallen logs, sliding down mud-slick slopes. The jungle grew hot as the sun climbed, turning every breath into thick syrup. Tanaka stumbled frequently. His nerves shook him as much as the terrain. Mori kept glancing over his shoulder as if he expected tanks to burst from the foliage behind them. By noon, sweat poured from their uniforms. Leeches clung to their legs. Mud coated everything, but they kept moving. Their forward company needed this intelligence. Headquarters needed it even more. They reached the lower ravine and made for the narrow creek bed that served as a hidden route back toward their outpost. Ishii splashed through the water, scanning for signs of American patrols. "Sergeant," Tanaka said, panting. Why didn't the Americans attack yet? They clearly have the numbers. Because they're preparing something larger. But what could be larger than... A twig snapped, hard, close. All three froze instantly. Ishii dropped into a crouch, rifle raised, finger resting lightly on the trigger. Mori mouthed silently, "Left flank." Ishii nodded. They shifted positions like ghosts, spreading out just enough to cover three angles. Another snap, then a rustle of leaves, then voices. American voices. Tanaka's eyes widened. He gestured, urgent. "Patrol." The enemy squad was moving parallel to the creek, maybe 20 meters away, but obscured by brush. Ishii heard their boots sloshing through mud, their gear clinking softly. Radios crackled. Someone laughed. The Japanese scouts crouched lower. 5 Americans passed. Then 6. Then 8. 2 carried flamethrowers. Ishii's pulse slammed against his ribs. The patrol stopped. One Marine pointed toward the creek bed. "Footprints." Tanaka inhaled sharply. Ishii silently signaled, "Retreat, quiet." They began backing away through the water, carefully placing each step. A boot splashed behind them. Mori jerked. A Marine had spotted them. "Hey!" the American shouted. "Movement!" Gunfire erupted. Ishii dove behind a rock, bullets shattering the water beside him. Tanaka rolled into the ferns. Mori fired a burst from his Arisaka, dropping the lead Marine. "Go!" Ishii shouted in Japanese. "Scatter!" They sprinted through the ravine as gunfire chased them. Rifle cracks echoed. Leaves exploded. Someone screamed. Mori? Tanaka. Ishii couldn't tell. He kept running, lungs burning, legs aching, mud flying. A machine gun burst tore through the foliage, ripping Tanaka's sleeve and carving a bloody line across his arm. They bounded over a fallen log, slid beneath roots, and dove into a depression thick with moss. Silence returned only after 10 agonizing minutes. The Americans eventually withdrew, likely believing the scouts had fled beyond pursuit. Ishii checked his men. Tanaka's wound was shallow but bleeding. Mori shook with adrenaline. Mud streaked across his face. "We can't engage them again," Tanaka whispered. "We can't risk dying with this information." "No," Ishii agreed. "This information must reach command, even if only one of us survives to deliver it." They resumed the journey, slower now, quieter, wincing with every snapped twig or rustling leaf. Tanaka's arm was bandaged with torn cloth. Mori walked limping from a twisted ankle he stubbornly insisted was fine. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts of their forward company's perimeter. Japanese sentries greeted them with relief and confusion at their disheveled state. Ishii didn't stop to rest. He went straight to Lieutenant Nakamura. Nakamura listened in growing disbelief as Ishii described what they'd seen. "You estimated 500 yesterday," Nakamura said slowly. "Now, you estimate 7,000. "Not estimate," Ishii replied. "Count 7,000 at minimum." Nakamura rubbed his temples. "That is impossible." "Sir," Ishii insisted, "the Americans have built roads we never detected. They are mobilizing something far larger than any operation we expected on Bougainville." The lieutenant paced. "This changes everything," he murmured. "If you are correct, they intend a full encirclement. Or worse, they intend to build airfields capable of reaching Rabaul." Ishii didn't respond. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what this meant. Bougainville was about to become a battlefield for the fate of the Northern Solomons. Nakamura looked up. "Sergeant Ishii?" "Yes, sir." "You will write a full report immediately. Then you will prepare to guide a larger reconnaissance unit. We must confirm the scale of this American movement." Ishii hesitated. "Sir, with all respect, you don't need confirmation." Nakamura frowned. "Why not?" Ishii exhaled slowly, exhaustion and dread finally crashing over him. "Because, Lieutenant," he gestured toward the distant southern horizon, "you will hear them soon." As if on cue, the faint rolling thunder of engines echoed through the jungle, not from one convoy, but from many. The Americans were coming, and nothing on the island would ever be the same. The jungle night did not fall on Bougainville so much as it dropped, swift, sudden, absolute. One moment the canopy glowed in the orange light of a sinking sun. The next, darkness pooled between the trees like ink. Sounds grew sharper, shadows lengthened, and the humid air thickened until it pressed on the lungs. Sergeant Masaru Ishii sat beneath the thatched roof of the forward command hut, sweat soaking into his collar as the dim yellow of an oil lamp cast flickering halos across the maps spread over the bamboo table. Lieutenant Nakamura bent over the documents, pencil tapping anxiously. "I keep reading your numbers," Nakamura muttered, "and my brain keeps rejecting them." Ishii said nothing. "What you saw—" The lieutenant stopped, as if starting the sentence physically hurt. "What you swear you saw is beyond anything we've encountered on this island." "It is beyond anything I believed possible," Ishii murmured. Nakamura straightened, pacing. 7,000 vehicles. How do you hide 7,000 vehicles? How do you fuel them? Where are the supply ships, the depots, the fuel stores? The Americans do not drop gasoline from the sky." "They do not," Ishii said, "but they can build faster than we can imagine." Nakamura turned sharply. "Impossible." Ishii's face hardened. "Sir, I watched a road appear where a road should not exist, not widened, not cleared. Built. In a single night. It seems their engineers move like ants, thousands of them." The lieutenant's pacing slowed. Silence returned. The heavy, suffocating kind that only came when a truth too large to accept hovered in the air. Outside, the jungle trembled once more with distant engine rumbles. Nakamura's eyes darted toward the doorway. "There it is again." "They haven't stopped since noon," Ishii said. "The movement continues, maybe even intensifies." The lieutenant didn't reply. He didn't have to. The war machine of an industrial titan was grinding forward, and the Japanese positions on Bougainville were ants in its path. An hour later, Ishii stepped outside into the humid darkness. The air was still, except for the steady, faint tremor beneath his feet, so subtle that a man standing still might miss it, but impossible to ignore once felt. It was like the island itself had developed a heartbeat, a mechanical pulse. He spotted Corporal Tanaka seated on an ammunition crate, arm bandaged, head tilted back against the trunk of a coconut palm. Private Mori sat nearby, carving a piece of wood with a small pocket knife, the blade scraping rhythmically in the dark. "Sergeant," Tanaka said, noticing Ishii's approach. "You finished the report?" "Yes." "And the lieutenant?" "Worried." Mori let out a humorless laugh. "I'm surprised he isn't panicking." "I think he is," Ishii replied. "But he is an officer. Panic is not permitted." Tanaka exhaled slowly, staring up through the canopy at the faint outline of stars. "Do you think command will believe us?" "No." Tanaka lowered his gaze. "Then what happens?" "The Americans will attack." Mori snorted. "Funny, they've been attacking for months." "Not like this," Ishii warned. "What we saw, that is preparation for something decisive." Footsteps rustled behind them. A young runner approached, saluting stiffly. "Sergeant Ishii, Lieutenant Nakamura requests your presence. A long-range message from regimental headquarters has arrived." Ishii exchanged a glance with Tanaka and Mori. "Stay sharp," he told them softly. "Rest while you can." Then he followed the runner back toward the command hut. Lieutenant Nakamura held a fresh radiogram, printed on crackling white paper. His expression was unreadable as he handed it to Ishii. "Read." Ishii scanned the contents. The message was brief, far too brief, considering what was at stake. Reconnaissance reports from southern sectors indicate increased enemy movement. Scale unknown, possible deception, continue standard patrol operations, reinforcements not expected, hold positions. Confirm enemy numbers before escalation. Ishii felt his stomach twist. "They don't believe us." "No," Nakamura said quietly. "They do not. They believe this is deception." "Sir, 7,000 vehicles cannot be deception." Nakamura rubbed his forehead. "Sergeant, Tokyo does not understand Bougainville. They believe the Americans fight like we do. Slow, cautious, predictable. They cannot imagine the scale of what you saw." Ishii folded the radiogram carefully. Orders? We send another patrol at dawn. Nakamura hesitated. But this time, you will not lead it. Ishii stiffened. Sir? Nakamura looked away. Headquarters thinks your report is exaggerated. They believe fatigue, jungle conditions, and enemy trickery may have influenced your estimate. Ishii's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, if they send another group to confirm what we saw, they may not return alive. I know, Nakamura said softly. Then why, because they require verification. A second report. At that moment, Ishii realized something chilling. They didn't want verification. They wanted reassurance. They wanted the second patrol to come back and say the numbers were far smaller, that everything was manageable, that nothing catastrophic was approaching. Who will lead the new patrol? Ishii asked. Nakamura hesitated. Sergeant Kubo. Ishii swore under his breath. Kubo was arrogant, reckless, brave, to the point of stupidity. A man who believed he could smell the enemy more accurately than any map or pair of binoculars. He will get them killed. He might, Nakamura admitted, but orders are orders. Ishii leaned forward. At least let Tanaka and Mori rest. They are not ready to return to the jungle. They won't be going, Nakamura said. Your squad remains here. You will prepare a detailed terrain map for Kubo's team. Ishii's fists curled tightly enough that his nails dug into his palms. He was helpless. He could do nothing but obey. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. Ishii sat beneath a lantern, drawing the clearest map he could, marking the ridges, the creek bed, the vantage points, the hidden dips where American patrols might ambush a careless scout. He drew every danger he could remember. He left nothing vague, but he knew it would not be enough. By the time dawn began to seep into the sky, the patrol was ready. Sergeant Kubo strutted into the clearing, wearing a confident grin, his rifle slung over one shoulder. Sergeant Ishii, he called mockingly. I hear you saw an entire motor pool rolling through the jungle. The other scouts chuckled. Ishii remained impassive. Take this seriously. Of course, Kubo said, waving a hand dismissively. But come now, 7,000. Perhaps you inhaled too much swamp gas. Tanaka approached, glaring. We saw what we saw. Kubo grinned wider. Then I will enjoy proving you wrong. He snatched the map from Ishii's hand. Barely glancing at it, Ishii caught his wrist. Listen to me. Kubo's smile vanished. The Americans have built new roads, hidden ones. Be alert for supply lines running east to west, not just north to south. They are moving entire battalions overnight. You will hear them long before you see. Kubo yanked his wrist back. I will conduct my patrol my own way, not through your fear. Kubo, we leave, the sergeant barked, and the patrol vanished into the trees. Mori spat into the mud. He's a dead man. Tanaka looked pained. And he'll get his squad killed too. Ishii didn't respond. He simply watched the jungle swallow them whole. 4 hours passed. Nothing. No radio, no signal, no runners, no sounds of skirmish. Then came the thunder. Ishii heard it first, a low, rolling vibration in the distance. The same one he had felt yesterday, but this time it was louder, closer, more insistent. The ground trembled slightly, as if something enormous was dragging itself across the island. Then a runner burst through the trees, bleeding from a cut over his eye. Sergeant Ishii, he gasped. Lieutenant Nakamura wants you at the southern perimeter. Now! Tanaka and Mori exchanged looks. They followed Ishii at once. When they reached the perimeter, a thin line of foxholes and sandbags, they found Nakamura standing rigid, binoculars pressed to his eyes. All color had drained from the lieutenant's face. Sir? Ishii asked. Nakamura handed him the binoculars without speaking. Ishii raised them slowly. Then his breath stopped. The ridgeline, 2 kilometers south, where the Americans had built their hidden road, was now alive with movement. Vehicles poured along the trail, not in a trickle, not in a steady column, but in a flood, row after row, line after line, a metallic river of trucks, tanks, bulldozers, amphibious tractors, artillery haulers, more than Ishii could count even with lenses pressed to his eyes. The rumble was deafening. The earth shook beneath them. Tanaka whispered, "They're not even trying to hide anymore." "No," Ishii said. "Why would they? They don't fear us." Mori pointed. "Sergeant, look, there." A small group of figures sprinted through the underbrush near the old missionary trail, Japanese uniforms fleeing for their lives. "Kubo's team," Ishii breathed. Before he could shout for help, gunfire erupted from the jungle, American automatic weapons, grenade blasts. The figures dropped one after another. Only one made it 10 more meters. Then a machine gun cut him down. Ishii lowered the binoculars slowly. "They're gone," he said quietly. Nakamura's face twisted, not in fear but in a grim, dawning comprehension. "We were wrong," the lieutenant whispered. "Headquarters was wrong. You were right." A deep boom echoed across the jungle, then another. Artillery. American artillery. The jungle canopy lit briefly as shells detonated somewhere to the southwest. Birds scattered in a frenzied cloud. Smoke curled through the treetops. Nakamura grabbed Ishii's shoulder. "Sergeant, I need your assessment, immediately." "What are we facing?" Ishii inhaled shakily. "Sir, this is not a probing attack." "Then what is it?" He looked toward the endless stream of American vehicles. "This is a full-scale logistical breakthrough. They are preparing to isolate and overwhelm every Japanese position on Bougainville." Another artillery volley shook the ground. "And they will succeed," Ishii added, voice low and steady, "unless we fall back before they encircle us." Nakamura stared at him, jaw tightening. "I must send another radiogram." "Sir," Ishii warned, "there is no time. We have no choice." "No," Ishii said, pointing south. "They are coming now." The lieutenant turned. The lead American armor had reached the end of the hidden road. Infantry columns poured forward behind them, moving with terrifying precision. A roar rose from the jungle, the unmistakable shout of advancing troops. "Prepare positions," Nakamura yelled. "Sound the alarm. All units to defensive lines." Soldiers scrambled. Weapons were loaded. Ammunition crates were dragged into foxholes. Panic rippled through the perimeter as the scale of the enemy advance became visible. Tanaka swallowed. "Sergeant, is this the end?" "No," Ishii said, gripping his rifle. "But it is the beginning of something very, very bad." The thunder of American engines grew louder, and the battle for Bougainville began in earnest. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.